Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Linda Schenk and I'm the Executive Officer of Wine Communicators Australia. I'm delighted to be here today with you and very excited to be introducing our next two speakers. Mark Rowley, Senior Analyst, and Ali Lockwood, Manager Stakeholder Engagement for Wine Australia. Today, Mark Rowley will discuss market trends in China wine market, and Ali will take a look around the opportunities for states, regions and brands to participate in major initiatives across China and Hong Kong. During the webinar, we would love to hear from you. So if you want to make any comments, ask questions, all you need to do is look at your comment box at the bottom of your screen and send in your questions, and I will repeat them for Mark and Ali. As always, we'll be recording this session and we will provide you with a link to re-watch the presentation at your leisure. So enough from me, let's get started. I'll pass you over to Mark.
Thank you for that, Linda. I'm the Senior Analyst at Wine Australia in the Market Insights team. Essentially, the Market Insights team is there to help businesses make better decisions out there with help of information. It's everything from supply to demand, and China is really the hot topic at the moment. Today's presentation is really a Lyrebird approach, pulling together research from all different sources and pulling that together with some of my own experiences in market as well. So what we'll be going through today are export trends, so looking at the Wine Australia export approval data, looking at the imported wine market and the customs data over there, look at the market settings, some of the large macro trends that are occurring in market, and then break that down into some of the channel information that we have, and also look at some opportunities out there in the cities and the different tiers across there, then finally finish off with some consumer insights. So as we know, Australian exports to China have been increasing at a rapid rate for quite a few years now. In September last year, China became the largest export market for Australia and are currently worth about $600 million. Current growth rates are 44% in the last year for value, and this is down slightly on 2016 when they were ranging between 50 to 60% during the year. You can see in this chart in the orange line, the Australian dollar has been appreciating. So this will mean that Australian wine isn't quite as competitive just with the exchange rate. So this result's very good as well against this trend. If we start breaking this down a little bit more into who's doing what and what type of businesses are doing well, we can look at how the majors are doing, the medium-sized businesses, and small levy payers and non-levy payers. So just to recap on what a levy payer is, this is a grape wine levy payer. So essentially any wine business with some facilities, either grape growing or wine making facilities. It gives you a bit of an idea about their business model. So a non-levy payer are most likely buying bulk wine and creating a brand and shipping it to into China. You can see that the majors are one of the largest segments there at about 30%. However, if you compare this to the traditional markets in the USA and UK, this is a rather small share. In those markets, top 10 businesses, exporters, account for about 90% of the market. And I think this is a reflection on the retail profile of the market in particular. In the UK, USA, the retailers are a lot bigger in size, and in China, it's a lot more fragmented in terms of channels and retailers. The next biggest significant block is those small non-levy payers, accounting for about 40% there. And as you can see, they're also a large part of the growth, 35% during the year. So that's slightly lower than what the majors are. So that's 73% growth. So that's where a lot of the growth is coming from. And then if you look at the smaller levy payers, some of the more traditional businesses, they are growing, but at 32%. So growth is slightly less. The other thing to note with the export profile in China is that there are just a lot of numbers, not just a lot of numbers, but growing every year. So what you'll find is that some of that growth is actually coming through extra numbers every year. So if you're going to look at a benchmark growth figure for what exporters in your group are doing, you should be paring that back somewhat to account for extra numbers. So a bit of a comparison, there's 1,078 non-levy payers in the small category in the last year, compared to 411 small levy payers. If you compare that to USA, a similar size market, there's about 250 to 300 exporters, so huge numbers there. If we take a look at some trends in the container type, we can see in the first chart just the value split by bulk shipments and packaged wine. Packaged wine shipments have been growing at a much more steady rate northward. However, you can see that big jump in the bulk wine shipments going back in 2016. Some of this has been driven by the free trade agreement and the short supply in Argentina. As we'll see in a few slides coming up, you can see that Chile is diverting wine into Argentina at the expense of the Chinese market. In the second chart, we can see the pricing of this of these two components. Bottled wine is growing quite steadily, and I'd like you to remember that when we look at some customs data later, where we see some pricing depression there, and there's a bit of a conflict in some of the data sets. Bulk wine is quite steady over the last year in terms of pricing. If we look at the break this down into price segments again, we can see that bulk segment is quite small down the bottom, but it is growing quite rapidly, up 147% in the last year to about 20 mil. And again, this is driven by that Argentinian effect. The other thing to note is that there is growth all along the price segments. In the orange chart, you can see growth is strongest in that less than $5 category, up 43%, and also that packaged category above $20 per litre. What this is reflecting is two main trends. It's that increasing wealth in the country that is propelling more luxury wine consumption, but there's also a lot more consumers coming into the market as well. And generally speaking, these people are going to be trying wines at maybe cheaper prices. So you'll see a bit of polarization in the trends in the coming years. We probably already know this, but the Chinese think of wine as red wine, and this chart will justify that. 94% of the value in the last year was red varieties, and the growth was coming from those varieties as well, so up 46% during the last year. And there is growth in those white segments, but it's just 25%, so still steady growth, but nothing compared to what the red is at this stage. If we look at the varieties, so this is just bottled wine now. Shiraz is the #1 variety. Again, this is reflecting the fact that the Chinese are really thinking about red wine when they think of grape wine, and the fact that it is Australia's #1 planted variety. Growth all across for all of those varieties. So Shiraz up 41%, Cabernet Sauvignon up 38%, etc. And a little bit of growth for those smaller whites. Interesting statistics from some of the wine intelligence research that's been undertaken. Shiraz, our #1 variety. 23% of Chinese imported wine consumers are actually aware of Shiraz as a variety. If you compare this to the #1 grape variety, Cabernet Sauvignon, 59% of the imported wine consumers are aware of Cabernet Sauvignon. So huge differential there. And there's a whole other 9 red varieties that are more well known than Shiraz. So it might be something to consider when shipping your wines into the country. Even Chardonnay, 41% of the consumers that are aware of the variety, and that's behind Riesling and Sauvignon Blanc in the country as well. So we'll look at some imported wine trends now. So this is just looking at total volumes in the market, and you can see in the orange line, volumes have been growing quite steadily as a category from all sources, up around 50% in 2000 at the start of 2016, but this has been reduced down to 11% in the latest period. So that's up to June 2017. Value has been lagging a little bit, but there's a little bit of weird stuff coming out of customers, for want of a better word. If we look at the bottled wine segment, we can see that the same trends are occurring here, because it is most of the wine that's being imported into the country. But some of the things that are driving some of the differences between the customs data and the Australian wine export data are things like this data being a CIF, so there will be some timing differences. The use of bonded warehouses in market, so wine can actually be shipped to China but not clear customs for months. And there could be some potential double invoicing there, but it's hard to ascertain how much of an effect that is having on the market. So one thing we know is that volumes are still increasing quite strongly, and there is some differences between the countries. So France is still the #1 country, as you can see in the blue down the bottom, but Australia has got a strong position in second spot there. And we do have a strong average price that you cannot see there. It is #1 out of those major source countries. If you look at the growth chart in the orange, you can see Australian imports are up 35% compared to France, who are up 14%. And this 14%, because of the higher base, just exceeded that of Australia. But it just goes to show Australia's strong performance in the market at this stage. Having a quick look at what's happening in the bulk wine markets, it has been strong growth for a few years now, and some of this is in response to the strong demand for imported wine. So Chinese wineries are looking to up the quality of their wines, and they'll be using imported bulk wine for this product. Some will also be looking to create brands that are of different countries of origins as well. But this market is really driven by price in the end. If you look back through time, you'll see that the main source country in the bulk wine market does differ, and really depending on economics. Going back 6 to 8 years, Argentina was #1, Australia had its turn as #1, and subsequently Chile is now #1, as we will see in this next slide. So Chile #1, really driven by the tariff advantage that they had through the first mover advantage with the free trade agreement. But as we know, that differential is reducing as the years go by under chapter. As I mentioned earlier, Argentina is short of wine, and that 50 million litres of wine, or 50 million litres less that Chile's sent into China in the last year, that's basically gone straight into Argentina. And you can see Spain and Australia are starting to take up some of the slack there. Looking at the sparkling segment quickly, sparkling wine has been quite subdued over the last 2-3 years, but there is starting to be a bit of a pickup. There has been a bit of a transition from champagne into sweeter styles, and the way that consumption is taking place in China is also shifting from the nightclub scene to more of a bring your own relaxed type consumption where you consume. Some of the theories about sparkling wine and why it isn't booming quite as much as the table wine is that, generally speaking, Chinese tend not to drink beverages cold, and sparkling wine is generally consumed cold, as we know. And again, just to look at those sparkling statistics by country of origin, and you can see Italy's really the winner there at the expense of Spain, France, and Australia as well. So now we'll look at some of the market settings and just look at some of these macro numbers of, we know that China is a huge population base, but it also historically has been quite a poor country as well. But we know that is rapidly changing. This is really coming about from the Chinese, government's transition to drive the economy from an investment level driven economy to a consumption driven economy. So if you compare China to USA, 68% of the GDP is consumption in the USA, but in China it's just 37%. So you can see there's huge slack there where Chinese can increase their consumption level. Urbanisation is also driving consumption growth. Incomes are higher in the cities, etc. You can see these numbers from 2011 to 2016. There's been a 28% increase in the urban population from 18 to 54. So 430 million Chinese now in that category. The share that is now classed upper middle class has also increased, but at a much higher rate. So that number's increased 133% to 112 million people. And if you look at those who are consuming imported wine, that's increased from 19 million to 48%. So not only is that consumer group larger now, but the proportion of people in that group is also larger as well. So that's increased from about, I think it was 40 to 43%. I mean, if you're looking at the total market, it's now a market of 2.3 billion litres. That's just exceeded the UK as the third largest market by volume, and it's still third behind the USA and France in terms of the value of the market. In this chart, it's quite easy to see that that austerity measures back in 2012 announced by President Xi, and this really cut down on the gift giving from government workers, etc. Growth is now resumed after that, and if you just trace a trend line through that chart, you can see it's basically the same trajectory starting to emerge once more. As consumption has gone to a more private approach, this is more of a sustainable level of consumption. And if we break that down between imports and domestic wine and look at Australia's share as well, you can see that in the blue line, imported wine is just becoming a much bigger part of the market in China. Some people do not realise that China is one of the largest producers of wine in the country. Quality is improving. They're not going to be an exporter at any time, but they still do make wine. It is an important thing to remember when exporting wine to China, why people are actually drinking imported wine to begin with. It's really about the trust that they have in Australian wine and imported wine in general. And if you're thinking about branding and labelling, I guess you don't want to make it too Chinese, otherwise people will think it's Chinese. You need to make sure that it's it does look Australian, and it will have that trust and prestige that comes along with that. So where is all this going? It is growing quite rapidly, and if you project out some of these trends, so if you take those Euromonitor projections and you project out the imported wine share, if those trends continue, and you look at the Australian wine share of the imported category, it's quite easy to see that China will become a $1 billion market in the near future. Of course, they're just projections. It needs to be done. I've just put that in context with the growth that we experienced in the USA and UK back in the early 2000s. And you can see the orange line for China, it's looking quite small at this stage compared to USA and UK. and that growth trajectory is much steeper for those other two markets as well. It does give another lesson in that those sales turned out to be not as sustainable as what we would hope. So this time we've got a chance to redeem ourselves and really look at the sustainability of the market and implement some of those lessons from the past that we should learn. Channels now. So we know that, as I said earlier, that the retail channels are a lot more just fragmented than in some of the markets we're used to. This is just to look at retail at a high level, not just wine. You can see e-commerce is really starting to take hold, 16% there. And some of the channels, such as hypermarkets and supermarkets, are a big part of the market, so 32% there, but much lower than what you would expect in Australia and UK, etc. And there are large differences between some of the outcomes for those retail channels as well. Specialty stores are going quite well. So you'll see the cosmetics and baby stores that fall into that category up 15 and 8%. And this does fold into liquor stores as well, growing quite steadily, and convenience as well. But if you look at that red line going down, the hypermarkets, it's declining as a category. And we'll speak a little bit more about hypermarkets in the following slides. But a quick look at what's happening on the on-trade. This is an area globally that is very hard to find information on, but we do have a little bit. So you can see that growth pre-austerity was driven by the on-trade. So this is some of those big banquets that we hear about in China that have really been curbed on. And this really signifies where Chinese consumers are consuming their wines. It's gone from less about the business occasion where wine's being served more to personal consumption. And this is really played out in the statistics here. You can see that the wine intelligence data shows that the average price of spend on a business dinner has fallen from 510 RMB to 464, and this is also shown up in wine statistics as well. The other thing to note is that wine lists are increasing in size and in complexity as well. Another interesting development is that wine is actually being delivered to some of these restaurants now, so taking more of a corkage approach to the business. So taking a look at these, the hypermarket again. So as I said earlier, all sales are down, and prices for wine are starting to normalise. This is really due to the online channel eating into the market. So it's pretty easy for a Chinese consumer to go online and go to a pricing comparison website and see what price they can get the wine for. So consumers are less willing to go into these type of stores and find these wines. As a result, these retailers are reducing the amount of space that they're dedicating to wine as well. And when I was over there in in June, we observed some of the promoters that were there to try and sell wine to the Chinese, and these promoters have got very little wine education. They're really there pointing out specials that are available and pointing them towards the brands that they're commissioned to sell. So online, this is really where all the heat is at the moment. There's really some amazing things happening in China at the moment as far as their technology is concerned. Privacy is a thing that Chinese have got less respect for. They know that the government's watching, and I guess they don't care. In the end, they're a little bit helpless to it all. So what this means is that some of the ecosystems that have been developed, the WeChats and the like, you can essentially stay in these ecosystems and essentially live your life without needing to go to a store. And in fact, lots of youth are not actually visiting specialty shops anymore. As you can see, 48% of imported wine drinkers purchase wine online, and this is only increasing. And the way they're doing this is on their phone. So 50% of spending in China, digital media ad spending in China, this data from Nelson, is now done on mobile. So this has really got repercussions for where you're doing any marketing. I guess a good example we were given is that why would you advertise on the side of a train when everyone's looking at their phones and not observing that? The other thing to know is that there are a lot of different platforms, and they will treat, you will need a different strategy for all these different platforms. Walmart is the biggest seller of wine in the country, and this is a case just because of that trust issue. They know that Walmart will be selling wine that is what it says it is. Whereas if you're on the JDs or Tmall's, it's more about having your own online store. But compared to Amazon, for instance, they'll do a lot more promotion for you as well. So yeah, that really deserves a whole webinar in itself, but given we've only got 40 minutes to talk about the market settings, I'll move on. Just briefly, traditional Chinese convenience is really only going to sell Chinese wine brands at the moment. So the dynasties, Changi's, etc., and Great Walls. So not really seen as much of an opportunity at this point. But if you look at Western convenience, the 7-Elevens, Family Marts, etc., these stores do sell quite a lot of liquor, and sales, as we saw earlier, have been increasing. So up 8% in general. I guess if you're looking at this channel from a small perspective, it will be quite hard to get into, as these product lines are really supplied through larger distributors, and they're going to have more of a standard offering. So if you walk into these stores in Shanghai, you'll see a standard mix of Jim Beam, Absolute Vodka, a Bordeaux, and TWE's range, and Jacob's Creek, maybe some Yellowtail in there as well. So really it's large retailers that are being sourced by large companies as well. Another channel that is very hard to get data on, like the rest of the market, is corporate gift giving. And it's thought that this segment can be about 10% of wine consumption in the country. You hear the stories about, a hospital with 30,000 people that give their employees one glass of wine every Friday. This works out to be 50,000 cases in 1 year, and this is one small hospital. So I guess your eyes could light up and think there's a huge opportunity there. But often this can be one-off purchases, and it's not really the best way to build a brand in China. But if you do want to get into this segment, it's really about building relationships with the people that are purchasing the wine, etc. So a quick look at at some nuances between the cities. I guess there's different opinions on the opportunity that different cities do present. Availability is limited in some of the cities, and I guess the sustainability of it is called into question. But there's no doubt that as incomes increase and sheer weight of numbers, that more people will be drinking wine in these smaller cities that often can make our cities look small. If you're looking at some of the general trends in the market, if we go from T1 to T4, if you're looking at prices are generally going to be cheaper in the bigger cities, the Tier 1, and economics are really driving this situation. So if you've got larger scale, you can run a business with tighter margins. Also, they're likely to have better distribution length, which does lower the cost of that wine, and some of those other factors just make the prices lower. If you're looking at imported wine share, generally speaking, they will be higher. The share will be higher in the tier 1s and tier 2s, and this is because incomes are going to be high, and these cities are where the trends are emerging from. If you're looking at just the rate of growth in the cities, growth rates are higher in the lower tier cities, but this is because it's coming off a lower base. And if you're looking at just general consumption of wine, including domestic wine, consumption is going to be much higher in the T1s and T2s. And again, this is just because of income levels and the trends emerging in these cities. So this is a bit of wine intelligence data now, and it's explaining some of the different consumer groups that we see in the larger cities. So the higher tier cities, Beijing, Guangzhou, Shanghai, Hangzhou, and Shenzhen, you see that there's more adventurous connoisseurs. So these are people that are liking to enjoy and try new things, and they're drinking wine on a regular basis, and it's helping them relax. But if you look at the lower tier cities, you've got more what they would classify as prestige-seeking traditionalists, and these are more brand-driven type consumers. If you look at the fashion in some of these cities and what's happening in the higher tier cities, they're taking more of an individualistic approach and being their own person, whereas in some of the lower tier cities, they're really sticking to the full outfit Gucci. They're just a little bit behind the times, so they're really looking towards the brand names to show their wealth and stature in society, whereas the higher tier consumers are more willing to be themselves. There is difference between what they are consuming. So the higher tier cities, they are drinking that champagne and cognac compared to some of the lower tier cities, but they're drinking those sparkling wines, Proseccos, Cava, etc. And the higher tier cities, they're also more willing to try those new world wines, so Australia and Chile. And that's the same trend as I was talking about before. So this is just an interesting little piece of analysis that my intern has been working on over the last week. And Starbucks is a huge company that has got a lot of money to do research in the market. So why do our own research when we can copy theirs? So we essentially gathered data on I think it was about 1,500 Starbucks stores in China, and we figured if Starbucks can make a go of it, the same consumers that drink coffee are going to be drinking wine as well. We ran some regression analysis over it, which really was to factor out some of the economic factors, such as incomes and retail spending, and really leave some of the unknown factors such as culture, etc., that would be explaining some of the higher numbers of coffee shops in the markets. So some of these markets may be interesting for some of those brands or wineries that would like to explore some opportunities outside of the major cities. So some of the interesting ones have come up. Shanghai, we won't talk about that, but Hangzhou, where there's a huge amount of coffee shops and what the economics would suggest. Hangzhou is actually the capital of e-commerce in China, and it's the home city of Alibaba. It's also got beautiful scenery and a rich cultural heritage, and it attracts 3.4 million foreign tourists every year. So what we've found in these numbers is a lot of the tourist cities have come up, and of course tourists are going to be more inclined to be drinking wine, etc. So they do present themselves as good opportunities for different consumption periods. The other one that comes to the fore was Sanya, and this is a place that's dubbed the Oriental Hawaii. I've never heard of this before, it's not my words, but apparently there's beautiful beaches and scenery, and tourism is also a major part of the economy there. So, these are some of the cities out there that could potentially become opportunities as some of the other cities become a little bit more congested with the competition. The other trend that is emerging is that consumption really differs and throughout the country. We know that the food is quite different as we move through the country, and also that flows through into the Chinese preferences when it comes to their wine. So if we're looking out west in Chengdu, this is really a Sichuan hot pot, lots of pepper foods, got lots of spice, lots of garlic, lots of chili. And if we look at what kind of wines that they are looking for, it's light and sweet that they like. I guess the other thing to remember is that these are the types of flavors that they're preferring, but it doesn't mean that they're actually drinking these wines with the food, but it does give some of the insight into why these things are occurring. If we're looking into the north around the Beijing area, lots of preserved foods are being eaten, lots of stews and wheat foods and maize and lots of lamb, and this feeds into different types of wines such as dry wines and full-bodied reds as well. If we move east, there's a lot more seafood eaten, and that also feeds into the wines. They're looking for fruity and rich wines. And down south in the Cantonese areas, where the food's not so greasy and there's not so much overwhelming flavour and less herbs, they're looking for more fresh and juicy characteristics in their wine. So just to finish off my section now with a few consumer insights that are coming, and we have touched on these briefly. There is much more personal wine consumption in China now. It's really gone from that arm's length purchasing where you're doing the gumbe, as fun as it is, to more personal consumption and going online and finding some wine, becoming adventurous, learning about wine. And Chinese are really thinking about wine as a better choice of alcohol. So there's that well-being instead of the drinking baijiu. It's turning towards wine, and it's helping them relax as life becomes busier and busier, and people just enjoy drinking wine as well, like we do here. And if we look at some of those key demographic trends, as we already talked about, there's 1.4 billion by 2020, so huge numbers, but a large policy change that will play out over the following years is that the one-child policy is effectively dead, and family sizes will start to increase. So it does bring into question that some of these key consumer groups going to be too busy with children to be drinking a whole lot of wine, or does it just change where people are actually consuming wine? The other demographic fact is that China is aging quite rapidly, much like the Western world, and there will be 300 million over 60s by 2020. In Western countries, we usually see consumption levels drop off as consumers retire. But luckily in China, these are not the main consumer groups that are actually drinking wine on a regular basis. So it doesn't look like that will impact on a macro level at this point. And a little bit about screw caps to finish off. And as you see, as people are moving towards more of an informal drinking manner, they're also looking towards screw caps as well. So you can see that if you're relaxing drinking at home, you're quite happy to have the screw cap, and but if you're celebrating in a special occasion, people still want that cork. So again, that kind of where people are consuming wine and how it fits in with the type of closure is really important to think about when branding your wine in China. And I'm happy with my voice holding up. Actually, there's one more slide. So I spoke too soon. And as I think I mentioned earlier as well, flavour is becoming a lot more important as well. And there's strong growth in fruit-driven, lower tannin styled reds. So there's some of the comments there. But as we saw earlier, there is white wine being consumed in the country. It's coming off a lower growth, but more people are drinking them. Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc, and Chardonnay really the top level varieties there. So that's enough of me for now, and that's what's happening in the market. And if you're looking to try and take advantage of some of those opportunities, a good person to start with is Ali, and she'll be talking about Vinexpo and some of the plans there.
Thanks, Mark. Look, before we swap over to Ali, is just for those that are listening, is there any questions at all for Mark? And while you're frantically typing, potentially, it's interesting, Mark, that you made a comment about the 2 children policy and how the consumption might actually decrease. In my experience, the more children you have, the more consumption there is. So is that not the same in the China market?
My consumption is decreasing, but I think it's just because my kid is getting me sick all the time. But yeah, it's something that needs a little bit more research than what I can really comment on. But sure. I think the sheer weight of numbers, more people increasing their consumption and more people getting involved in drinking wine, that'll more than offset any decline in personal consumption for that segment of consumers.
Yeah, thank you. Now, are you guys going to swap seats, or are you going to swap over? Just while these guys are swapping seats, which you can't see, but we can see it here in the background, there's been a few comments, Mark, thanking you for your presentation. And is there a copy that we can share with our members? So this presentation will become live on the WCA website, this week. You'll also be sent out a link so you can view the presentation again at your leisure. But enough from me. We want to hear more from Ali, so I'll pass it over to her.
Thank you, Linda, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining the Wine Communicators webinar. We're delighted to be here to talk to you today. Today I'm going to talk predominantly about a couple of opportunities for exporters and specifically for regions as well, to participate in a couple of major events and initiatives that will be happening in the first half of next year. Australia will be participating, and Wine Australia will be participating at Vinexpo in Hong Kong in May 2018. So we've just heard from Mark about the opportunity in China, which we're all acutely aware of, the growth at all price points, and certainly the opportunity for imported wine with the growing middle class. Vinexpo, as many of you would well know, or Hong Kong rather, as many of you would know, is a vastly different market to mainland China and is quite well established, relatively speaking. But Hong Kong does impact market sentiment in mainland China, and we also see that there's a strong visitation from mainland China to Vinexpo. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide an opportunity for individual companies, but also for regions to participate directly in this major event. It will be our key event for the next financial year. So we strongly recommend companies and regions to consider participation. So Vinexpo Hong Kong is to be held from the 29th to the 31st of May. In the Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Centre. I'm sure many of you have visited that before in previous years. The great news for Australia is that Australia is the country of honour in 2018. So it's a real coup for Australia. It's such a major event. Vinexpo really is the most influential wine fair in the Asia Pacific region. We see it as a hub event for a lot of other buyers from across the region to come and visit. So it really is a fantastic opportunity for the spotlight to be well and truly upon Australia during this major fair. By way of background, I'm sure some of you are already familiar with the fair, but for those that are not, it is held every 2 years. And as I said, it is a hub event where we'll see a lot of trade and media visiting from across the region. What does Country of Honour mean for Australia? Well, it really provides us with a premium positioning at the fair. We'll be promoted not only by Wine Australia, we'll put a heavy emphasis and focus upon promoting this specific event, but also by the show organisers. We'll have a premium positioning in the event as well too. So the Wine Australia Pavilion will be located in a desirable location where we can maximise visitation. And there'll be significant promotion from Wine Australia above and beyond the event, so networking events and masterclasses, etc. May I just pause and apologise for how much text and copy is on each slide. You will receive a copy from Linda and from Wine Communicators on this, so please don't try and read it all. So Hong Kong, a little bit about Hong Kong. As many of you would know, in 2008, the Hong Kong government made a decision to lift all wine duties, which really opened up the market to become a hub for wine into mainland China and the rest of Asia. So about 43% of what goes into Hong Kong is re-exported out of Hong Kong. It's also a really important hub for storage and distribution, wine auction, retail, education. And as I mentioned before, what happens in Hong Kong does impact mainland China as well too. So it's an important market for Australian wine specifically, especially at a value perspective as well. So who attends Vinexpo? So that's a picture of Vinexpo Hong Kong from 2016. So 17,200 participants visited last year, and 51 countries were represented. The majority of those that attended were the decision makers, so 39% were owners or CEOs of their companies and 34% were buyers. In terms of where they're actually coming from, the number one market, which is no surprise, is Hong Kong and mainland China. That's followed by South Korea and then Japan, Vietnam and Taiwan. There's also a significant amount of visitors from Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore and Australia. So we'll be working very closely with Austrade across the region as well too to ensure that there's a high awareness of Australia's representation at the event, so that there's the opportunity to attract trade from broadly across the region. So Australia's presence as Country of Honour. So what this means, as I mentioned before, we'll have a very dominant position in the expo, which is fantastic. It allows us to maximise foot traffic and visitation. We're expecting that it will be at least double the pavilion size. This is, as I said, the major event for Wine Australia in this financial year. So it is a key priority for us to have a significant representation, and we'd love to see as many of you there as possible. We'll have more on-stand education. We run tastings and masterclasses throughout the period of Vinexpo, and there's certainly opportunities for regions to participate in that, which I'll touch on shortly. And importantly, we'll have a larger networking and meeting space as well too, because it often is all about the meetings at these fairs. So there are a couple of ways that companies can participate. At the moment, what's actually up on our website is the opportunity for individual wineries to participate. They can either take a full table, which is $9,000, or a half a table, which is $5,500. So in a full table, you can show a maximum of up to 12 SKUs, and a half table is a maximum of up to 6 SKUs. We do have a number of conditions which are worth noting, which are important. We request that there's no private label, bulk wines, export-only labels, etc. shown in or put forward in Vinexpo, and we are only seeking winery brand wines only. We also want brands to demonstrate existing sales in the Australian domestic market. and participation is only open to wine producers as well as their agents and distributors. At least one wine from each brand to be showcased must have received 90 points and above from a reputable third-party endorser such as James Halliday or equivalent. New to market brands are permitted to attend. It's not just for existing brands. However, they also need to demonstrate that they are export ready if required. So there is certainly a significant opportunity for individual brands to participate, but equally there's an opportunity for regions to participate and really promote their regional identity. And that is through a regional area, a regionally branded area. So what we're asking regions to do is to secure a minimum of 4 full individual tables. That could be 1 brand per table, or it might be up to 2 brands per table. And then if a region is able to secure 4 full tables, then they're permitted to have a regional table or a regional presence at the event. This is a longer space or larger space than a standard table, and it can hold up to 15 different SKUs with a maximum of 5 brands. Alternatively, the regional association might decide to put on a regional showcase, which will be managed by the regional association, and they can show more than 5 brands if it is managed by the regional association. We've found that this format works very well in the past, and it allows regions to really put out a strong premium regional message, masterclasses, tastings, verticals, etc. And this is something we'd like to encourage at the fair. The benefit of having a regional presence is not only does it open up access to a region to have a regional bar or shared table, but it also opens up opportunities for masterclasses, and we will provide a minimum of 1 masterclass to be held on the Wine Australia Pavilion for that region. We also will provide a minimum of 1 masterclass at the Vinexpo Academy as well. So there'll be no cost to regions for that. The only cost will be stock and presenters and coordination. No cost to rent the space at all. The other benefit, of course, is that the area where the 4 to 5 minimum tables will be regionally branded, and there'll be a number of meeting tables in that area as well. So it really gives us an opportunity to promote our fine wines and regions to the world. I won't go through this in detail, and as I said, you will receive a copy of this later, but there's a bit more information about the regional bar or shared table, grouping wineries into a regional presence, the on-stand masterclass and the Vinexpo masterclass, which runs alongside the main exhibition hall during the day and are very well attended. So again, there's a number of conditions which we've outlined. The same conditions for individual wineries also applies to regional participations in terms of winery brand wines only and demonstrating existing sales in Australia as well. What we are seeking regions to do is to act as the facilitator to develop the regional presence at Vinexpo. So to secure the participation from the region's wineries, given that there's a minimum of 4 full tables that are required to have a regional representation, and also to manage all the communication with the wineries and to manage the regional bar or regional space and masterclasses should you wish to pursue that. So the next steps, regions who'd like to participate can register through the expression of interest through the link below. And it's important to note that this is an expression of interest only. We're not seeking details of specific wineries or specific SKUs that will be participating at Vinexpo at this stage. All we're seeking is information or acknowledgement from a region that yes, they would like to be involved. Then there'll be another 2 months to determine which wineries and which brands and SKUs will be involved. But at this stage, we do not require that level of detail. I should also mention too, we certainly welcome state governments' involvement as well too, and we're in discussion with a number of state governments across Australia. If state government or state wine associations are interested in participating, if they could contact me directly, my details are included in this presentation. That would be much appreciated. So in terms of the key dates, this presentation will be sent to all wine regions tomorrow, and we'll be seeking expressions of interest from the regional associations and not the brands, just from the regional associations by Friday the 8th of September. So this is an expression of interest to have a regional presence at Vinexpo with 4 full tables and 1 regional bar at a minimum. We'll then circle back to regions and seek details of the brands by the 3rd of November 2017. And payment is due next year. There's a few testimonials. I won't read them. You can read them at your leisure with a glass of wine in hand, I hope. And then finally and importantly, I will touch on the events that are happening in China directly after Vinexpo. So many of you would have participated in the China Roadshow in the past, and next year we will be linking the China Roadshow to Vinexpo in Hong Kong. So companies have the opportunity to visit Vinexpo from the 29th to the 31st of May, and then from the 4th to the 11th of June, the China Roadshow will happen across 1 first-tier city and 3 second-tier cities. So it's certainly an opportunity to have a very strong presence and very active couple of weeks across Hong Kong and China. And there's an opportunity to register your interest for that as well, and the details are included in the presentation. If you have any queries, you can contact either myself, my email address is there, or Sarah Roberts, who's our Marketing Officer for Asia Pacific. And we look forward to communicating further with you on this opportunity. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Ali. Is there any questions for Ali before we wrap up? We're on time, which is always good. It doesn't appear that way. So I'd just like to formally thank Ali and Mark for their very clear and insightful presentation. And thanks all to everybody who has attended today's webinar. We really appreciate your participation. Our next webinar actually is being held on the 12th of September. And we'll be hearing from Larry Lockshin, who's the Head of School of Marketing Professor at University of South Australia. Larry will be sharing with us his knowledge on how wine brands can grow. So we'd love to see you at that webinar on the 12th of September. For now, thanks to all for attending. Bye for now.